Good morning.
Good morning.
We're live, Teresa.
We are live. Okay. So welcome to anyone who's joining us here today for the live stream and anyone who's picking this up later. Cynthia and I are the co-founders of CultureTalk. And CultureTalk is a platform that enables you to make organizational culture tangible. And we do that through a series of surveys and assessments and facilitation materials and workshops, and through a partner community of trained facilitators who bring this work deeply into organizations in order to really solve some important interrelated business challenges. So each week, Cynthia and I bring some aspect of this work, one of those challenges, one of those opportunities forward in our conversations here on LinkedIn Live. So this is Thursdays with Culture Talk. I'm coming to you from Saratoga Springs, New York, and Cynthia, give a wave. She is here from Denver, Colorado.
Welcome.
So, welcome. And today, if you've been following us, our topic is personal branding, professional branding, if you will, trying to get a look inside that aspect of the employment equation that is all about who am I and how am I connected to the purpose of this organization? What's important that I take away, that I come out of this experience with, and how do I bring my best self, the things that I'm really passionate about, good at, and have a lot of value to bring to an organization? How do I really articulate what those things are and connect the dots between my purpose and the purpose of my organization? So that's what this field of personal or professional branding really takes a look at. But like all things, when we're trying to evaluate, how, especially when it's personal, especially when I'm thinking about myself, it's hard, right? It's hard to get clarity. It's hard to get perspective, and it's hard to be objective, perhaps, when you're trying to think about yourself. Cynthia, you like to say,
yeah, I always liken it's kind of like trying to see your backside in the mirror, right? Like to talk about yourself or to think about, your brand or how you're packaging. Who am I? And presenting that to the world, it can be really uncomfortable. And so the process we want to share today and talk about is designed to make that easier.
Right. And we think one of the most effective ways to share that and to articulate that is, of course, through story. And if you follow Culture Talk, then you already know that Archetype, which is the framework we use, are there really stories? These are story patterns that replicate themselves over and over again. So as human beings, Archetype are stories that we already understand. And once we learn the language and understand the patterns, then we're able to tell these stories in a much more effective way. One of the things we hear an awful lot about is leaders are encouraged to really take hold of story as a tool in business to motivate people, to engage people, to communicate more quickly and more effectively. And unfortunately, while that directive to use story is something that is just easily said, some learning and training and tactics around how to deploy story is kind of sorely lacking.
Yeah.
And so one of the other things is, how do you do that? How do you systemize the approach of using story as a tool coming in, whether you're a leader in your organization or you're an up and coming leader in your organization?
Yeah, I think that how to is so important, right? Because if you are a leader and you're being told, or even just like you're in an organization and people want you to step into your own story, it's like, I think people go through this, like, what do I talk about? I'm not interesting. I don't have a cool story. I didn't have this dramatic, like they immediately, it's almost like your mind goes blank, I think.
Yes.
And so we're going to share the process that we teach at CultureTalk, that our partner community actually uses when they engage with clients in trying to help either individuals or individuals within an organization build their personal brand. But before we share that process, just why is story so powerful? What is in a story already? Kind of, if you think about, why, like we use stories in filmmaking, for example, right? Why? Because they draw people in, and what kind of content already exists in a story. If you are a character in a story, you already know that there's a motivation, right? So we always hear Simon Sinek famously talk about start with why. What is the why? What is your purpose? And story has that sort of baked into it already, that motivational content. The other thing story has is, in a character, in a story, even if we're watching a movie, we know like certain characters, they're good at certain things, right? We know a hero character comes in and saves the day. We know when we see, for example, in a movie, a character that has some magician, that magician is in there kind of connecting the dots and making things work or transforming situations. So
What's interesting about that too, Cynthia? We talk about strength and shadow in these patterns, like this continuum they exist on. And one of the great story arcs, or, that we see is watching a character, no matter what archetype they're acting from, go through that arc between, the strength of their pattern and then over exerting that pattern, maybe over expressing that pattern right into the shadow of that pattern, and then finding their way back out, finding their way back to center, back to their strength. And so not only do we see in movies and in novels and other stories, the characters show up, but we also see them kind of come full circle and, land back in, hopefully, that strength.
Yeah. And why it resonates so easily is because we know these stories. We live these stories. And when we use archetype and an assessment like the CultureTalk for Individuals assessment to measure archetypes and to work with people to validate what story patterns are actually active for them, it's just amazing to watch that process and watch the light bulbs go off and to watch people go, oh my gosh, it makes so much sense that I'm high in this pattern because I can see in my life how different stories and different situations that suddenly it makes sense to me. I'm thinking about Kim Perrone, shout out to CultureTalk partners, who shared on Martin Luther King Day how she has such a high revolutionary archetype pattern, and how measuring that and discovering that was like, oh, of course.
Freeing, right.
It makes so much sense. And so,
and also it gives someone like Kim, for instance, who has a very strong pattern, not only of a revolutionary, but of the magician, the hero, and the revolutionary, right? All about results and mastery and change. It gives her a framework for understanding. So when we come to that aspect of personal and professional brand, what are the promises that I make? What are the outcomes that you can expect? What are the commitments you're going to see me, committed to year after year, over and over again? It's all tied into that.
Yeah. What can you count on me for? And what is personally motivating? Right. And I'm glad that you mentioned, Teresa, that multiple archetypes, right? Because we use 12 storylines in the system at CultureTalk. And that's because we're multidimensional as human beings. We're not like all hero every day. We have, a unique combination of patterns that uniquely express through our lived experience and can be packaged into our personal brand. So if you are high hero, what kind of hero are you?
Right.
If you are high magician, what kind of magician are you? That's like the nuance. And suddenly people who maybe thought they didn't have anything to talk about or didn't know how to tap into their stories, suddenly there's like guardrails. There's a way for them to start saying, I see how I got from here to here and how those stories are connected. And once I know that, in a personal brand, we want to be able to talk about our purpose. We want to be able to talk about our motivations and strengths. And now we've got concepts. We've got words. We've got, a tone. Can you comment a little bit on that? And we could mention Kate Bonnycastle as another partner. Working a lot with that.
Sure. So, I mean, when we think about pulling all those pieces together in that unique thumbprint, right, that is your personal brand, you want to have a way to articulate it, to express it. And when we measure it and then you validate it, so you find those stories, you find those points of connection. Now, in order to share it in a story with somebody else, you need to be able to narrow it down a little bit. In the brand world, we talk about a funnel, right? Sort of at the top of the funnel are all the big ideas. We want to get it down to a place at the bottom where you can kind of spit that out in a few short phrases that communicate everything. So this, this idea helps us to help somebody else to very quickly connect to who you are through that story. So from a process perspective, one suggestion that we make when you come out with a result and you see what your patterns are, that's just the beginning. The next step is to really evaluate, what are different points of influence in your life? We call them story points, and to start capturing those and maybe words that align with the tone you mentioned, that energy of a pattern. So the way that a hero gets things done is going to be very different, for instance, than how an explorer might get things done. So the words that you would use to describe those things differently will really begin to shift someone's understanding and their perspective. So the first thing is this is a creative exercise with guardrails, right? So just kind of almost like a throwing it all up, like get it all out, get it on paper, express through all kinds of lenses, the ways in which those patterns have been your lived experience, and then start to narrow it down. So then get more selective about the words. And there's a couple of exercises that we use in our personal branding course that somebody can take and go through this workbook and can come down so that they are articulating things like belief statements and talking about, again, what can you count on me for? What am I passionate about? Getting it down to a handful of really pertinent, and at this point, they're loaded with content and story. And those statements really give us the fodder that we need to share our story. Yeah. But share it in a way that the other human beings will quickly understand what those patterns are.
I think when we see people go through this process and get really clear on what are my archetypes, what are my stories, what are the words and ideas that feel like me, that sense of this is me makes people feel way more comfortable when it comes to, starting to, do things with their brand, right? It gives them that lens through which to talk about what they're experiencing in their jobs, in what they want to put in their LinkedIn profile, what they want their headshot to look like. Suddenly, instead of just being like anything, it's very defined in that you can deliver yourself over and over again in a really consistent way.
Right.
We will, by the way, if you are somebody who's working on your personal brand this year, we will include a link to our personal branding class underneath in the comments here. Or if you're someone who's in the world of branding and maybe you're doing branding with clients or in organizations, we do have another certification class coming in March, which will give you access to all of the tools that we're talking about here. So we'll include a link to that certification course as well.
Yeah, I think I just want to mention as well, while you're on that, coaches are another type of professional who can really benefit from helping their clients get clarity and a way to express this personal brand. So even through the coaching lens and in that relationship, it's a really strong outcome to be able to get clarity around who you are and to be able to tell that story and to articulate it.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it does for coaches in particular, help them when they're coaching leaders. How do I lead? Like all of those things are connected, right? All of those things. So.
Absolutely. So what are some ways that, once you have this clear understanding and your story and a way to articulate it, that then you can go ahead and use it, maybe for your own professional growth. Maybe, we've been talking a lot about leadership, but what about, your own ability to network within your organization? Or if you're in a sales capacity or you're just, growing a network outside of your organization. Let's talk about a little bit about, now I know my story, how can I be a more effective networker?
Yeah, I actually love that. I love that application and that idea, because networking, like personal branding, is an area where there's a lot of discomfort. Like, what do I say? You know what I mean? How do I say myself? And because if you are doing, if you're doing a really intentional process around identifying and connecting to who you are, I think it just is a confidence builder. It's a confidence builder in terms of like, now I'm in a conversation and I already know kind of what I bring that is unique and what people count on me and what resonates with people when I talk about the work I'm doing and why I'm doing it.
I love that piece of it right there, because what you will find is when you get clarity and you're able to articulate in a strong way, then you'll see the resonance, and people will know that it's true. So even though, I think sometimes the what do I say feels like I don't want to brag about myself, I don't want to overstate something. I think that when people recognize the truth in how you're presenting yourself, then there's a sense of acceptance and almost, and that's where you get a boost, right? Because you're clear, you're communicating, and you're bringing something important to the table. And just as important, you're not taking credit or stepping into things that are not your strength, and you don't have to. So you're able to equally say, hey, I'd better let you handle that. That's not my area of strength. I'm going to look for someone to support me. And so you show up as, with this authentic human who's clear about what they're good at and also clear where they need colleagues and
growing, right?
Growing. Exactly.
Absolutely. And I think just, as you see that take hold, you also start to see people begin to identify what role in an organization, what does a career path look like? Like if this is who I am and what I'm good at and my why, I can think about my brand in terms of where am I growing to? And so it becomes a really powerful development concept as well. Where can I be more of myself? And what kind of job role would I fulfill to do that?
Right. Yeah. And then another thing is, you mentioned just a little bit about getting the right people in the right seats, sort of team alignment. When people get clear on and are able to step into what they do want to do, where they do want to grow, and they're able to, actually claim and own those things, then we can get the right people in the right jobs. And I've seen it where, people are literally in a team turning and saying, I don't like this. I'm not good at it. Here, you do it. And so switching roles, switching responsibilities, and letting go of the need to be everything, and really allowing people to shine and do what they love to do, and letting go of what you're not really that good at. So it's a great tool for teams instead of having to put up a false front,
Right.
or the perception that I can do it all.
Yeah, and archetypes are they're universal, and they are whole life perspective. They really answer kind of that existential question of life, of who am I? And, I hope we've shared some ideas here that help you really understand why it's so important for professionals to answer that question in a strong, solid way that allows them to be clear and consistent and to grow. I want to give a preview of, we're going to be back on LinkedIn Live on February 9th. We're now doing these mostly every other week. But on February 9th, we've invited Mike Taylor of Mike Taylor Consulting, one of our branding professionals. Teresa, he works with clients in a variety of different industries, but both on kind of corporate and professional branding. And he's going to join us to talk about why professional brand is your greatest business asset. So I think he's going to build out some around these ideas.
Yeah. And Mike has a really unique way of tying together the brand of the individual with the brand of the organization, and creating this bridge, what he calls ambassador branding, where the individuals become ambassadors for the organizational brand through their own lens. So he's got a really unique way of bringing that to life. So that ought to be a fantastic conversation.
So thanks for joining us today. Love to see you on February 9th if you want to continue exploring this topic of branding. We are throughout January and February really focused on a conversation around brand and experience as one of the critical paths to developing a successful workplace culture.
Yep. So stick with us throughout the year. We're going to be exploring a number of critical paths. If you're interested in learning more, check out the links below. And thanks for joining us.
Have a beautiful day.